right. So, spirituality. What is spirituality? So, we are exploring the theme of spirituality, and I think when thinking about it, spirituality is the way that we locate the sacred, whatever that sacred is to us, whether it's a restaurant, or a song, or a book, or a relationship. And there are different ways for us to locate that sacred. It could be through fasting, through language, through prayer, worship, dance, whatever that could look like. If you know me, I know I am a massive cyclist and I love cycling. And it's one way for me to locate the sacred. So there is actually a route that you can take from London all the way out to Whitstable, a small village on the southeastern coast of the UK. I think a few people have done that route before. And it's about 150 kilometers away from London. And as you cycle through that, it's called Pilgrim's Way. And it's because it's the exact same route that the pilgrims used to follow in the medieval times from London all the way to Canterbury as their pilgrimage. And I love that in today's world, I can do that on a bike, and that's how I locate the sacred, compared to medieval times where they used to go to that cathedral in Canterbury. So different people have different ways of locating the sacred. But what makes it special, what makes it beautiful, is when we do it together. And the way that we do it together is through spoken word. And that's why I'm really, really excited to introduce today's speaker. Today's speaker, Neelofer, is someone who's been on the circuit of spoken word poetry in London. She's performed in several festivals and several different venues. Also has her poetry been featured in some really interesting spaces, the Women in Prisons work that you've done. So without further ado, I want to introduce Neelofer.
And then will you do the clicker? Good morning, everybody. I am, as Al said, and I want to say a big thank you to Al, because I feel like as calm and as tolerant and as spiritual as he is, I feel like I've stressed him out this past week, and I've tested that patience. So big thank you to Al, because I'm not usually such a disaster story, but yeah. I'm here with you to explore my perspective on what spirituality is. And when you went onto the page to book for this morning, we had a nice little intro to say where the origins of the word spirituality comes from. So I'm going to start by sharing a spoken word piece with you that I think is a nice little summary of my train of thought. It's called Prisoner of Curiosity. As I look into your childlike eyes, I see your adolescent cries, yet I perceive no tears. Just an overwhelming need to be heard, moreover, you just need to be understood. But as I attempt to look into the windows of your soul, some of them seem to be tainted, and I suddenly realize that I can never know you as well as I had hoped to. But see, as deep as your psyche transcends, mine too is a complicated blend of phenomenon, unexplainable in words, and if I attempt to communicate my thoughts visually, I provide a guarantee that you'll need more than parental guidance, more than a little spiritual guidance. Not because it's explicit in nature, but by virtue of experiences past, you just might not find your way out. See, because there's no point in providing delusions of hope that there's a beginner's guide to compassion or empathy. See, I can pretend to know what you mean and vice versa, I suppose. On such pretense, weak foundation is often composed, but where's the truth in that? I'd only be guessing, see? If I presume to tell you the method of your madness, I would consequently be dictating to your subliminal conscience. And see, now comes into play the self-fulfilling prophecy. Please realize you're incapable of shaping my mentality, because I'm a somebody, not a nobody. Hell, I am the one and only, one of a kind intellectual mind, but definitely not infallible. And it's true. We are influenced by various life sources. We internalize the institutionalized status quo. However, the significance of my presence is the ability to rock the boat of the so-called establishment. So if, in the process, when I rock it this way and that, you fall out into waters deep, Just learn to swim. Swimming, floating even in the waters of life, murky waters that play host to capsizing souls, showing no hospitality to salvation. You see, it amazes me that we are immersed in such profound technology that we can't fathom nor see our failure to explain the simple matter of truth. No explanations can be found of our recent subordination to the internet surfing, virtual retaliation, mind programming notions such as the Matrix, and yet they still can't cure the common cold. Would I be so bold as to suggest the world's gone crazy, or would that be politically incorrect? Possibly, maybe. Nevertheless, I am angered and confused, to say the least, at these absurd contradictions suspended before me. You see, show business pays a phenomenal fee, and yet political prisoners won't be set free. Even at the beginning of this century, we've come so far, they say. I say, not far enough. Because some at the top, the so-called cream of the crop, possess a certain kind of paper. The paper to which I refer is money. Paper and ink doesn't even make one blink at the opportunity for possessing it for oneself. But I ask you, why are people so money hungry when the real hunger should be for knowledge and your thirst should be for the truth? Me, I'm a prisoner of my own curiosity, and who I ask shall bestow some answers upon me. Well, there's only one answer to that, my friends. Only my spiritual journey will keep me free. Thank you. So, when I was thinking about doing this talk, I thought to myself, shall I Google the term, what is spirituality? Because the question is Google our new spiritual guru? Because when we want to know something, we want to find out something, it seems, and other search engines are available, by the way, but Google seems to be our port of call. And so when I put the search term in, there was over 3 billion answers that popped up. And I thought to myself, in the 3 billion different perspectives that have come up, where does one start? Where does one start to begin to answer this big, vast question? And the conclusion that I came to is, with 3 billion results, I don't think Google can answer the question for you. And that's the point. I think a question like this, and the question that spirituality in itself asks of us and of the world, is something that Google can't do. And so then I thought, I'll speak to you about what I call the spiritual identity. So in life, we all wear many hats. We are all many things. We're not one thing. But my path to spirituality, or as Boy Nash very beautifully communicated in his intro, a pilgrimage is not necessarily only connected to religion. It's not necessarily a religious journey. It's a quest. It's a search. And spirituality is something, I think, very personal to all of us. So in wearing the many hats, I have to say, being a poet is my favorite. Because not only did I choose poetry, poetry chose me. And I think that's the thing that is undeniable. The way I choose to communicate, the way my journey has evolved, poetry is at the very forefront of that journey. So it's really interesting when I introduce myself, and then the next question is, you know, when you meet people, you're networking, people say, what do you do? What is it that you do exactly? And when you're a person who does many things, it's very hard to answer that question, because people want the answer like, well, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, oh, I work in IT. I can't answer the question like that, because there's many different things that I do. But does my job title reflect who I am? Does does my career path really say to you who I am? And I think, for me, I've learnt to ask different questions when I meet people, rather than what do you do, where are you from? Because I think there's much deeper answers to those questions. And for me, in everything that I do, spirituality is a driving force in all of what I do creatively. So I am a multi-creative. I do many different things, from radio to podcasting. I write columns, perform spoken word. I'm a writer. I also facilitate workshops with young people, with women in prisons, and that keeps me grounded. And it's really important when you are in the creative industry, there's two paths that you can take. And my spirituality has taken me down a path where I always want to keep whatever I do, whether it be poetry or music, very grounded to real people, and how poetry is a tool that can help you to do many things. I believe poetry can be therapy. Poetry is a tool for sharing messages and human stories that you can't do using any other art form. So, when I was putting this deck together, I thought, oh, how do I explain what spirituality looks like for me? And so the Venn diagram started off very simply with the 3 circles, and then it got a little bit crazy, as you can see, with so many things around it. But essentially, I will try and talk you through it from my perspective, is that spirituality, truth, and creativity are at the core of what I do, and they're all linked. Because with my truth is my vision, with my spirituality, which is made up of my values, my belief systems, it's been influenced by how I was brought up, how I've grown up, but also values like empathy and compassion. Spirituality is that journey that we choose, the path that we take to enlightenment, and whatever enlightenment it is that you seek. But along the way, there is duality that I have come to understand. You're just not defined by one thing. And because spirituality is evolving and ever-changing, it just doesn't, it's not something you decide one day and then it stays still, and that's it. You know, it's a growth journey as you go along. So duality is something I've learned to embrace, because I don't fit into any box, and I don't believe that we should put anyone into boxes. So creativity being my passion, and the way I communicate is how I express, is how I experience joy, is how I keep in the present. And this for me is spirituality. Like giving this talk today, writing the poetry, is being in the moment and understanding that really now is all that we have. Tomorrow is not guaranteed. Yesterday I can't change. So right now I have to be in the moment. And at the point where my passion and my purpose connected, that is when my journey really became very clear to me. Because when you're doing something that hasn't been done before necessarily, it can be a lonely path. It can be something where the answers are not laid out for you. And so part of my spirituality is embracing the uncertainty that brings, and knowing that that's okay. You don't have to have all the answers. But along the way, the choices that I've made have meant that I've allowed myself to connect with my passion and purpose, and those two things connected are really what drives me forward. And my spirituality is a way that I can gain that sense of peace. How do I do that? I do that because when I said poetry chose me, again, you're going to think, well, why have I got left brain, right brain? Because you think to yourself, sometimes we have more questions than answers, right? We're in the information age at the moment, and I feel like we have more questions than we have answers. And so when we're seeking the answers, where do we go? And I ask myself, why am I the way I am? Why does poetry speak to my soul? Why do I feel alive when I'm being creative as opposed to behind a desk doing a 9 to 5? No disrespect to the 9 to 5ers or the corporate people, but it's because I am a right-brainer, because I am, the way I operate is by all of these things: creativity, intuition, feelings, imagination. You can call me a daydreamer. Things that appeal to me are colour, rhythm, the arts. And I don't like boxes. I don't like right and wrong. I don't like black and white. I like the space in between. Sorry, bear with me. Tablet keeps switching off. So I'm speaking off the dome rather than from my notes. So this, basically, what I'm trying to say is that poetry, music, spoken word, creative writing, where I feel alive, all lends itself to a life in the arts. And so I feel like my DNA, or the way my brain is made up, is why the path chose me and why I chose the path. Can I have a show of hands? How many people think they're right-brainers in the room? Okay, about half, a little less than half. Of course, we all engage both sides, but we do tend to, be one or the other. Naturally, we are drawn to one or the other. But in conclusion, really, as many diagrams as I can show you, my brain is a place of beautiful chaos. And it's about embracing the chaos. It's about knowing that any art form, and for me it being poetry and spoken word, is really a way of ultimately expressing your creativity in your own true voice. So, in spiritual identity, there's questions I've asked myself. And spirituality being a path we choose, a journey we take, we explore the big questions. Some of the questions that I've asked myself when religion and spirituality sometimes conflict. So I grew up in a community that believed my virtue existed inside of a headscarf, and I reject that, because for me, my virtue doesn't belong in whether I wear a headscarf or not. It belongs in the gaze of the person looking at me. So regardless, my virtue should be safe. Is duality something that we can embrace? Is duality something that we can live our lives embracing different things, and still be called spiritual? Yes, I believe we can. But the biggest thing that I believe nowadays, what I want to talk to you about, is spiritual consumption. So it's something like when we talk about physical health and mental health, we have spiritual health. And so spiritual energy is something that is really important to be mindful of. Sorry, 1 second. In terms of spiritual consumption, spiritual energy, when we think about consuming, we think about things that we buy, things that we purchase, adding items to our basket, what we eat, what we drink, what we're consuming. But what do we mentally consume? What are we feeding our spirit? So what does your feed look like on your social media? What does your timeline look like? All of this really impacts your spiritual energy, and we have to be really careful about what we're consuming and how this influences us. So I do regular digital detoxes because I want to make sure that I'm not consuming things that are bad for my spiritual energy or bad for my mental health. And And I think that's really important to keep your path clear, to continue learning and understanding what it is that your passion and purpose is. How do you do that? And how can you continue to be spiritual in your path in a really authentic, truthful way? So I have a piece on virtue, but considering the time, I'm going to move on to the next part, which is basically to say, I think spirituality is about transcending and breaking all labels. So all of the outer boxes here are all things that are white noise, are all things that really don't define us, but we tend to lead with those things. And actually, the spiritual journey, when you're on it, and you understand that we're bigger than where we live, what our race is, where we come from, what our bank balance is. As a woman, whether I'm a mother or I'm not a mother, we're all judged on these things: marital status, how, you know, what your educational qualifications are. These things are all really not connected to your spirituality. Really, it's about understanding that we're energy, we are light, we're things that are so much bigger than all the minutiae of labels that are attached to us. So for many years, I tried to balance a corporate career and do the creativity, but the creative things that I do could not just remain a hobby, because it's what speaks to my soul. It's what allows me to be free. And so I understood that I actually had to embrace who I am by just disregarding all the labels that have been put on me and the expectations that have been put on me, and actually to be truly who I really want to be is actually by understanding that there's no labels and no boxes for me. Now, as a creative, I often get asked, where do you find inspiration? You know, what inspires you to write the pieces that you do or perform the pieces that you do? Where do you get the subject matter? And it's the same thing with spirituality. So we can ask, where do you find it? Where does it live? For me, because I'm a poet, I look at everything and everyone through a poet's lens. So I can find inspiration anywhere. I can find it in nature, in script dialogue, in cinematography, in song lyrics. I can find it in random acts of kindness between strangers that I witness at the train station or on the bus. It just is around us all the time. The Alchemist was a game changer for me when I read it, and it actually led me to write a piece that then became a single and was released on a UK record label, because it influenced me so much in terms of my way of thinking. Tupac, you might think, how is that connected to spirituality? But actually he's one of my favorite poets. And although he's known as a hip-hop artist that passed away very young, he was actually a very, very talented poet. And the best collection of poetry that he wrote, The Rose That Grew From Concrete, was actually written from a prison cell. And it's really, really inspiring. So it's just a handful of examples of where spirituality can be found in your reading, in what you see, in what you listen to. It really is everywhere. So how do I practice my spirituality is through what I do. Like I mentioned before, I work with young people. I work with vulnerable women in society. I work with women in prisons. So outside of the poetry and spoken word circuit and performing, what I really want to do with my work and my words is inspire, to uplift, to empower, to educate. All these values, I think, is the foundations of my spirituality and how I practice it. recently I've gone into schools and performed a piece that is very close to my heart, and it speaks on identity. So we all know, a lot of people speak about the N-word, and how controversial that is and whether it should be used in song lyrics or not. I've written a piece called the P-word because I am Pakistani. And so there's a piece that I've written called Paki. And I use that word repeatedly in the piece, and it's quite shocking for people. But actually, it's about owning your own narrative, taking control of your story and flipping the narrative. And when I've performed it to young people, they've actually said to me, I actually feel seen, I feel heard, I feel validated. So I feel like when I share my work with others, and it can have the ability to inspire others or give them a voice, give them the tools to find their voice and their true authentic selves, then I'm doing my job. I'm doing what I'm meant for. I'm living my purpose and I'm living my passion. The other thing about spirituality is really my journey, the biggest learning points in my own personal journey is always pushing outside of comfort zones and not being afraid to show your vulnerability. I feel hugely vulnerable right now because I'm used to just having my set, performing my poetry or delivering a workshop, and I know what I'm doing. But to be asked to speak about such a vast subject from a personal perspective, something I haven't done before. So I'm sure this was not a perfect presentation, but I'm sure that tomorrow I will have feel like I've grown just by having done it, just by trying to share with you and connect with you guys. So it's about setting goals, but not being afraid to make mistakes, learning from them, and leave a little room for miracles. So each of us can learn, and the each one teach one philosophy about empowering others to do the same. So when we push outside of our comfort zones, because it's human nature to want to stay in there and not push out, I promise you, every time I've not regretted it. And it's about switching the mindset of, if you wake up and say, today, no moment is going to be ordinary, there are no ordinary moments, then you'll experience that day so much differently. And so spirituality for me, living a spiritual life, having a spiritual mindset is about living your legend. And like all of the things I've said, it's like pushing the boundaries of what you believe. We've been conditioned so heavily into believing that we are limited to what we can achieve and what we can do and where we can go. And my true spiritual path is really making the impact that I can make personally, because we all have the ability within us to make the impact, but in our own unique way. And it's about connecting with that, recognizing that, and then sharing that and being very authentic. So I'm not a sculptor, I'm not an artist, so I can't create monuments and statues. But what I can do, my poems will be the monuments that I leave behind. Now, have we got time to do a little interactive thing? So in the workshops that I do with young people, so a little taster for you to get involved is on the journey of spirituality. Self-love and self-care is a huge part of that. And I think with self-care and self-love, we need to have the courage to ask for the things that we need. And we often don't have that courage. So I did this exercise with some 16-year-olds yesterday when I was running a workshop, and the results were very interesting. And I said to them, how many of you do your own laundry? And only like maybe a few hands went up, and I was like, so the parents are still doing the laundry. But when we do the laundry, there's always a care label attached, an instruction label attached, right? As to how you treat the garment to get the best results. So I will ask you to imagine if you had to create your own care label, if you had to give a set of instructions to get the best results from you, what would they be? What would be on your care label? Like mine would be 50% finest silk, 50% cashmere. It would say, always serve hot coffee first thing in the morning. It would say, treat with love and affection to get the best results. When hangry, put it down, walk away. That's what mine would say, or some of the things that mine would say. So I invite you to think about what 3 things, maybe the top 3 things that your own care label would say. Would anyone like to share what theirs might be? If I couldn't see you and the first thing I saw before I met you was your instruction label, what would you be telling me?
I believe the first part will be quite similar. And yeah, coffee is a must. Also is believe in my decisions. Don't criticize them. And third one is treat nicely.
Anyone else? Don't be shy. Oh, we got. Yes.
To provide constructive feedback. But without feedback, we cannot grow.
Love that. Absolutely. It's being open to that constructive feedback, right? And knowing that I think when the more and more we practice self-love is when we start to seek out the right mirrors in others. And how people reflect back on us is sometimes you can learn more about yourself that way, in how you're perceived, because sometimes you want to be perceived a certain way and that's not how it's translating. So yeah, I think that's really important. The other thing that you can take away with you, may not have time to do it in this moment, but I'd invite you to maybe later on today or over the weekend, a writing prompt. If I had the courage to ask, I would ask for. And just do a free writing exercise and let your pen hit the page, and don't let the pen come off the page, and just see what comes. And it doesn't have to be in the form of a poem. It doesn't even have to have some structure, but it's a really good exercise to ask yourself. When I did this with a group of women, the things that came out were just very profound, because it's the first time that they'd been asked that. Like, if you had the courage to really ask for what you needed or what you wanted, what would you ask for? I'd ask for the courage to say more goodbyes. I'd ask for more love, more understanding, less judgment. I'd ask for more help, because I've never been good at asking for that. So it's a really good exercise to ask yourself, how brave are you? And do you have the courage on a daily to ask for what you need? Because when we understand what we need, that's how we are able to give more back to others. And yeah, I don't know if any of that made sense, to be honest, but I hope that I've given you some perspective on how I approach spirituality, or how it's been a part of my creative journey. And these are the ways that you can keep in touch. Thank you.
For a couple of questions. Thank you, Neelofer. Any questions, if you've got for Neelofer, she'll hang around. I'm actually just curious, how was it kind of working with women in prisons, and what that creative process was like?
So the reason I do the work that I do, like I said, is to keep myself grounded, because when you are in the performance circuit, it can very easily become about ego. It can very easily become about, how many people are following you on Instagram, or how many people are booking you for headline gigs. And so that's why I always endeavour to work with projects that keep me really grounded, and also make sure that the work I'm producing is making a difference in people's lives in a real way. So working with women in prison or who have come out of prison, who are trying to reintegrate back into community, they have no self-esteem. They feel like their voices are not heard, their stories are not told. And so when you give women like that an opportunity to express what they really feel, and their experience, they then feel validated, their confidence then grows, and their stories are the ones that need to be told. So one thing that I say is that I believe poetry is a way of giving the voiceless a voice. Whether I do that through my work or I enable others to do that is really important.
So first of all, can I just say thank you very much. It was really inspiring, not just visually, but everything on your slides and what you said really resonated with me. So thank you for that. And secondly, I think you touched upon something really important, and that is when we introduce ourselves to others, we always go to the place of, yeah, this is what I do. And I'm also grappling with you. How do you get people to say, who is it that I am? Because that is really who we are. You touched upon it, you said that you're kind of thinking of ways of getting people to introduce themselves by kind of saying, well, who are you? And I'm really interested to know how you do that.
Yeah, so for example, I get the question, like, what do you do for a living? And so I've started answering that question by saying, I live. I live. And so then that will force the other, but they're like, well, you know, people are taken aback with that response because they're, what do you mean? We all live. Yeah, we do. But that's what I do for a living. Now ask me, what is it that I do to pay the bills? That's a different question. What do I do? What do I do that brings me passion and joy? That's a different question. What do I feel passionate about? What are my ambitions? What gives me joy? What makes me, you know, what in the world right now that's going on is something that I want to make a difference about? Those kind of questions, I'll get to know you much quicker, rather than where do you live? What job do you do? You know, these are very kind of constricting, closed questions, because you answer that question and then people form their own judgment. So if I say to you, well, I live in Sloane Square and I'm a corporate lawyer, that's going to paint a picture for you. But that doesn't tell you what I'm passionate about, what I love, what makes me sad, what makes me happy, you know, my aspirations for what I want to do. So I think it's about having a different mindset of not asking those same questions over and over again. And then thinking about how you answer that question. So, you know, if I asked you, sorry, what's your name? Anat. So if I said to you, Anat, hi, nice to meet you. Who are you?
Yeah, well, do you know what? Interestingly, I was scammed recently into paying for football tickets, and it's a terrible feeling. It's a terrible feeling, and it just made me realise that who I am a very honest person, and it got me to the thought that someone violated that. And then it got me thinking, well, that's how I should be introducing myself to somebody who wants to live with honesty and integrity. And that is what is important to me. It's interesting that it took, you know, a crime for that to kind of surface, because I've never introduced myself like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes things do have to happen. And that's the thing of spirituality, right? Is understanding that rejections are redirections, is understanding that sometimes the bad things that happen to us are actually just learning points for us to understand ourselves better. You know, so I know that, for example, a lot of people talk about having, and especially post-pandemic, a lot of people talk about having social anxiety, you know, and mixing in large groups again. And it's because we had 2 years of just being focused on our own energy in our own space. And then you come out again and you have to navigate all these different energies. And so for me, it was a realization that actually I'm a big empath and people's energies really impact me. So what can I put in place to keep my, you know, my levels up and not be drained? Yeah.
I think Neelofer will hang back for some more questions, but we're running out of time. But
Yeah.
another round of applause for Neelofer. Thank you so much. So, as always, we wrap up our events with Community Minutes, which is your time to take the stage and share whatever you need, whether you're looking for